This is Doug Stout. We're here with William Frazier. It's January 15, 2014. William, when were you born? What date were you born?
June the 6th, 1920.
Okay. And you were born in Muskingum County?
Nashport.
Okay.
That's pre-Dillon Dam.
Yeah. And what did your parents do?
My father was a farmer. Mother, before she married him, was a professor of music at Denison University. And they hitched up and she moved to Nashport. And that would be in 1919. And so I came along in 1920, and there were two others after me.
What were you doing before the service? Before you went?
Well, let's see. I was farming.
Okay.
And at that time, before draftable young people became scarce, it was permissible to have two draft age people on the same farm, providing enough food for the Army, and we had a pretty good sized operation. So I was deferred, they call it, and until things got tighter, and they had this search closure for people, and they said, "One of you guys got to go." So I told my brother that I don't know what put this into my head, but I did. I said, I'll go. He didn't argue with me, and that's what happened.
So did you enlist? Did you enlist then, or were you
No,
drafted?
I was drafted.
You were drafted, okay. And then, so you were drafted into the Army?
Well, yes. The situation on those things is they just draft you into the service, and then they parcel you out there, and I ended up in the Army Medical Department.
Where did you do your basic training?
Camp Barclay, Texas.
You ended up in medical? Had you had any medical experience before that?
Had I had any?
Right.
No. They have to have so many, so here's a bunch I took.
So it wasn't do you want to, it was you're now a medic.
That's right.
Okay. And then was there special medic schooling you had to take after?
Well, there were such things, but it shook out that I didn't really take any of them. I ended up as a litter bearer and company aid man for the infantry, and that's how I managed to get on Omaha Beach on June the 6th.
So when did you go into service? I missed that question.
About the 1st of July of 43.
43. So you were in almost a year before Omaha.
Yes, we had 17 weeks of basic training, and then a certain amount of time you just hurry up someplace and wait. And then joined the 29th Division over in England and did invasion exercises for about 5 or 6 months, and then the real thing happened.
Where were you stationed in England?
At a place called Bodmin in Cornwall, which is the tail of the squirrel out this way.
Okay. So you invaded Omaha Beach on your birthday.
Mm-hmm. It was one chance in 365.
Right. I mean, how ironic was that? I mean,
well, as I say, it has to be some day, and there's 365 days, and that's one turned out to be.
Wow. So what wave were you in? How soon were you?
Well, do you want the theoretical or the actual?
The actual.
Well, I'll give you theoretical first.
Okay.
I was supposed to be in the 7th wave. They're 10 minutes apart.
Okay.
Well, it didn't work out that way. That would put us on the beach at 7:40 in the morning because it started at 6:30. It was near 11 o'clock before we got there. And we were on what's called an LCI, landing craft inventory. Are you acquainted with them?
Yes, sir.
So underneath there's 4 compartments in those, and the medics had one. Well, we approached the beach at well, just good in daylight, and got there on schedule. We didn't know, all we could tell was what was going on down in the hold, and we had our lieutenant with us, and he, as soon as we could hear the ship grate on the sand, and knew we were in France. And the lieutenant shouted up, "When do you want us? Just shut up, we'll get you when you get around to it." So he shut up. Waited and waited, waited and waited. And pretty soon the motor started up and the ship started backing off from here, and he yelled up, "What about us?" You never heard so much cussing in your life. The point was, why did you say something?
Right.
Well, he pointed out his orders not to. Those Navy men, I'll tell you, they were ready for leave a hot spot.
I'll bet.
Evidently. And but we could. It's too late because you see the what they call the sappers.
Mm-hmm.
Deactivated a lane into the, and not everything, just enough.
Right.
Well, and enough to get out. Well, and we'd given up our spot. Somebody else was already in it. So they couldn't go out the way they came in, so they just didn't know what to do. And they circled around out there in a little ways from the shore, and managed to get themselves caught on a barrier underneath about so deep under the water, and tight enough they couldn't get loose.
Huh.
So, finally something good happened. They came out on deck with what we call Mae Wests. That's a big yellow
Life preserver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Named in honor of Mae because of her boobs.
Yeah.
Well, and passed them out one apiece, and also gave each of us each 2 of us, litter with blankets full of that to take in. We were supposed to take in when we got there. Well, the instructions said take them in, so take them in. You ought to get soaked in water naturally, but
right.
Anyhow. So we hopped over into the ocean, and it was over our heads, of course, but Mae was quite a help to us. So we just kind of dog paddled in, and I suppose probably the second house down there probably, and then you could get your feet under you and walk, wade your way out. So it was probably 11 or 11:30 time we actually got on the beach.
So by that time had they got the Germans pretty much? Was the beach secure? I mean, or were you under fire when you were?
By secure, there were no Jerry's on the beach, and we could see the line about halfway up a good steep hill was there, and they were advancing as sort of,
Right.
and there was just a tremendous amount of confusion. And I'd see in there, one thing I had to remember, a mortar squad has 3 men in it. One to carry the base of the mortar, the other to carry the tube, and the other to carry the ammo. Well, one guy came along with, I don't know what, one piece of it, but he didn't know where his people were, and he was kind of hunting them, but they were either drowned or lost somewhere. But that was just one example of many.
Right.
And we came up there on the beach, soaked, of course, and most of them got on dry, of course, but we lucky ones got a ducking. And the senior officer there was a major, I believe. I didn't know him, and he said, "Well, the machine guns, whatever there were, were no longer, they had been cleared away, but artillery, probably 75s, were beginning to drop in." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Well, it won't be any hotter up there. We might as well get across here and go." So we followed him, and he went through a little kind of a swamp there, and started up the hill, and we got up away from there, no problem. And
how far did you go? I mean, that day, did you? I mean, just get up the hill, or
as far as the top of the hill?
Okay.
We dug in some foxholes at the top of the hill, and rested and slept a little, and we could hear the thug, 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 thug of American machine guns and the pit, 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 pit of the German machine pistols playing a duet out there. But they never bothered us other than that. And came morning, why, we saw 4 or 5 tanks of our some outfit, we didn't know which, and did a darn fool trick. I did, at least. I hopped on the side and rode them. Well, no, that was crazy, because medics are supposed to have and did have protection against being shot.
Right.
A good many of them were killed, but it was accidental. And if you're on there, you're fair game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wised up before I got shot.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I was slow, but not too slow.
So you got moved up. How long did it take for you to get out of the hedgerows and?
Well, that's a little. Now, the nearest little town there is called Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, St. Lawrence on the Sea. And about a day later, we caught up with our people. And in the meantime, I managed to get. I didn't mind the fact that my clothes dried on me, but you had on boots about so high, and they were full of water too, and there's sand in the water, and it dried enough so that the sand was moist. You just kind of rub your feet like sandpaper, and that made them sore right quick. So it was of high importance to get someplace for some dry socks. So after a day or two later, we got that done, and a little bit of food too. So then we had landed on the 1st Division beach. That's how we managed to get on, which is right chock-a-block up against the 29th, which is our outfit. And we were transferred over to where we belonged. And most of there were, when I first went on the beach, I looked up and there's a place about as wide as this room probably. There was still sand above high water mark. And that, as far as you could see, maybe a quarter of a mile each way, 2/3 of that ground was covered with dead bodies. A few probably were shot, I don't imagine, but most of them were drowned.
And just washed up.
You can see mustaches of mucus, air bubbles under the noses, every one of them. And we heard later there were 600 of them. I thought there was fully that many. And the thing was that they had started in on small boats, just oversized rowboats with a motor on them. And they were heavily loaded, a lot of people and a lot of equipment. And they live in the water, and the waves are not very big, but they're big enough to flop over them.
Right.
And those people didn't have any, they were heavily laden and a lot of clothes on, and they didn't have a chance.
Right.
And so we went through San Laurent-sur-Mer, and that's where I first saw my first Jerry. He was dead, hanging by an ankle, suspended by a rope out of the church belfry. He was prepared to
Sharpshooter?
shoot somebody, and he was chained up so he couldn't get away. And I suppose he got shot by the Americans, I don't know.
Right.
And we went on through there to, what's the other little town? I can't remember now, but it's just also Sur-Mer on the sea. And then, about 5 miles later, up to a place called Grand Comte. And then turned to the left and took over the area that the 101st Airborne had been in. And that was where we started up against the bocage. Are you acquainted with the bocage?
No, sir.
Well, it's a bunch of little farms. Not very big, but big enough evidently to support people after a fashion. And they had a lot of apple trees. That's what they squeeze the juice and make hard cider. And some dairy and some grain, wheat and rye, that sort of thing. But little irregular fields, about an acre or so apiece, maybe a little over. Irregular fences, and the fences were this way. They were just, I don't know how they arranged it, but banks of soil, maybe 6 or 8 feet high, and on that would be little trees growing and briars, and that would be what would hold the cattle in where they belonged. Well, that's what made it so tough, because especially after night, the Jerrys would get behind those and sneak around behind you and boop, 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 boop. And but we made progress, and after about 20 or 30 days, we'd gotten maybe 20 or 30 miles. And in that length of time, I got this information from the Saturday Evening Post after the war, that there were 3,500 killed in our division, and about 2 or 3 times that many wounded, and about 2 or 3,000 prisoners. How could you get that many out of a division of, say, 18,000? Well, you bring in some new ones.
Right.
And I, at that time, was put in the division, the company aid station, which is regimental station for taking care of the wounded. And I was a gopher. And on an average day, there would be about 200 people come through. And now, sometimes more, sometimes less, but at average, maybe 200. The majority of them were American, were our outfit. But there were quite a sprinkling of Jerry's and of local peasants. And what their big mistake was that they had next to their homes they had what they call a cove, which is a cave.
Okay.
And it's where they kept their milk, so they didn't have refrigerators, of course. And their wine, their cider, and their food they left over and so on. They thought, hell, there's a place to go. Big fat mistake, because the scared infantry that's coming up through there would throw a grenade in there first and then investigate.
Yeah.
And I guess of all the ones that I saw, the one that I just can't forget was a little girl about 6 years old. She's blonde and nice white skin, and looked nice girl. Nothing wrong until you looked at her arms. Both of them off right about here.
Oh.
Just standing there looking at us. And we bandaged her up the best we could, and sent her back, of course, and I never heard any more about her. I imagine she's had some kind of artificial limbs. But there are many, many others. That's the one that sticks in my head the most.
Now, you were a French teacher when you came home. Did you know French when you went over?
I had 1 year in college, and we learned quite a bit. And I didn't know very much, but I knew any more than anybody else did.
So they probably called you a lot.
I learned as fast as possible.
Yeah, they probably called you a lot to interpret then, probably, didn't they?
And one thing, the first thing we met, first whole-skinned Frenchman we met with some farmers, and we wanted water to wash with. We take their helmets off, and they had a strap, you use it for a bail, you know. And I expect I told him a dozen times almost before he figured out what I wanted, because he wasn't too bright either, and my French was not sufficiently good. I'd say l'eau pour laver, and I should have said de l'eau s'il vous plaît pour se laver, and that would be water to wash myself with.
Okay.
You do it to yourself every time in French.
Right.
And but finally we managed to get some, and I got to the place where, well, what we had in the way of food was what we call reconstituted eggs. You've heard of that,
yes,
I suppose. You just they pour some hot water on some yellow powder, stir it up, and heat it a little bit, and voila, come and get it.
Right.
Well, it's food, I guess, but it sure isn't good food. And so we'd all try to figure out ways to get some French eggs, and if we could do that, we were issued some invasion currency, and the Frenchman would take some of it, and chocolate. That was the way, chocolate or cigarettes. And so I was the one that did most of the talking in my area, at least, as far as arranging a transfer of one good for the other.
So when you were in France, how soon did you start getting mail? Was it after the invasion? Did you start getting mail very soon after or did it take a while to?
Well, a while. I don't really remember. I'd say a month maybe. There's two kinds of mail. The regular letters, they can make it in about 14 days. And what do they call, not email, what do they call
V-mail? V-mail, wasn't it? Yeah.
D-mail.
V is in victory?
Exactly, V-mail, that's
yes.
it. I can think of email when
right.
And that's just a sheet of paper, and you write on it, and they'll take it and photograph it. So about that big, and send it over, reconstitute it. It'll get there in 12 days.
So you did get to send word home to your folks that you were okay.
Well, I did. Also at that time I was married, and my wife was pregnant when I left, and I was thinking afterwards that my son was about a year old before his mother knew that I knew that he was here.
Okay. Wow. So you got word back. Then did you stay in France then?
We were in France until the first battle ended about the 20th of July. And then we got into that place called St. Lo, and that it was in the line of the Jerry's had constructed very informally, but no great fortifications or anything. But that was the end of the bocage, and it was time for a breakout. And that's the time that we were there, and then got resupplied and reinforced. Strange, fresh people. And then about the 25th of July is when the big push began. And that was a real thing. We were seated on the hillside where we could oversee the bombardment of the Jerry's by American planes. And there's 24 planes in a wing. I counted 120 wings, I believe, altogether, which would be about 3,500 planes.
Oh my goodness.
And at first, you were close enough you could see the bombs in the air where they fell. And could see the Jerry's shooting at them, and I counted 12 or 13 that they knocked down, and near misses many other times. But toward the end, there wasn't any more. No more Jerry's. Either they're out of ammunition or they were smashed, or both.
The noise of that had to be almost deafening. The noise, I would think, would be deafening with all those bombs falling.
Well, it's pretty noisy, but at any rate, that's where Patton. We brought him up and let him get loose,
Right.
so he could run out through there, and he did. And then we and two other divisions went down to our little Normandy Beach is separated from Brittany by kind of a bay there. And we went down, we were, after the resistance melted away, we were able to get down and around there, and we went over in Brittany toward the city of Brest.
Okay.
And the idea was that they wanted to capture that city because, as I understand it, they didn't know how far they'd get before winter, and they wanted to be sure to have ports that they could bring in stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our assignment was to take Brest. So it wasn't a very soft job.
Right.
A lot of times it is, but this is not. This is one time it wasn't. And it took about 6 or 7 weeks there. And about that time, I told the captain in charge that I didn't feel very useful as a gopher, and that I thought I should be returned to what made me say I don't know, but I did, to the litter platoon. And his eyebrows went up, but about 3 or 4 hours later, I found myself with him. And one thing that happens for a lot of the time is that they have what they call reconnaissance, and that means sneaking around in no man's land in the enemy territory to find out what you can about how many there are, what they've got in the way of equipment, what their plans are, if you can find out anything, all sorts of stuff like that.
Right.
And that's what we were getting ready to do. And at that time, this particular platoon had only one officer in it, a lieutenant, and before about dark, why we got a mortar barrage from the Jerry's, and it lasted about half an hour, I suppose. And mortar, if they can see their target, are very, very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know where we were exactly, so they just shot in our direction. And we started to dig foxholes, but it's hard ground, and didn't have any to dig with very well, and the officer in charge pretty sharply says, "You want us to quit that noise because it attracts enemy fire." Well, it did.
Yeah.
Something did anyway. And we had no cover. We got down to the base of like those fences I described.
Mm-hmm.
And the best cover we had, was a good old boy named Clem Hansen. I didn't know him before and never saw him much afterwards, but he and I were literally bosom buddies. That's literal.
Yeah.
On the ground, stretched out. And you could hear noise of the mortar being discharged, it'd go boom, and then about 4 seconds later it goes splat. That's when she comes in. Well, and boom followed splat pretty regular for quite a while, and we just hugged each other and shivered. And as you can see, I'm here.
Right. I mean, that has to be terrifying. That would have to be terrifying, I would think. That
I was about as scared as I ever got, I think. But now that's nothing tremendous for the infantry itself. Gets through that pretty often.
Right.
And then after that, we got orders to form up and take off over a strange country toward the Jerry outpost in order for reconnaissance, and we did. And we were the 4 men in the other platoon at the back had a job of unreeling a gauze bandage out through with the idea that you could follow that home through a strange country after dark. That was a beautiful idea. It didn't work very well. Partway up, for some reason, they wanted something. They either forgot something or wanted to send something back. I don't remember what, but I was selected to follow the tape back to the starting point and do whatever it was I was supposed to do. I don't remember what it was.
Right.
I got part way back and the line was cut, and not even close. It was just one end there, but not the other.
Right.
So I was wandering around no man's land in the dark by myself. So we had what they call a sine and cosine. That's nothing to do with mathematics.
Right.
It's for instance, if I said kingdom, you're supposed to say come.
Right.
They change them every night. Well, I went out through there, and I think I was hunting more Yankees, so that's what they call them, Yanks.
Right.
So I said, I yelled kingdom, kingdom, not too loud. And I never got come. I did finally get somebody roused up, and I heard a Jerry machine pistol, and leaves over my head came down, and that shut me up, and I turned around the other direction. And then I was wandering around down in there, and it had been cloudy, but the clouds came out, cleared away, and there was a full moon, and you can see almost as good as you can in here, not quite. And I looked up, and there were 3 Yanks on the bank above me. What the hell didn't they answer? So I said, "Hey, Yank." No answer. Nothing. So I said, well, I kept getting closer all the time, yelling the same thing, kind of a loud whisper.
Right.
And finally I punched at one of them, and he just rolled back down over the hill, and rigor mortis set in, so the other 2 the same, I think.
Right.
And each of them had a hole in their helmet.
Huh.
So, but about that time, here come our bunch back again. Mission accomplished or whatever. And they had very little resistance. There's only one person injured. That was the lieutenant. He had a shot in the head and critical. And he was on a litter, and I had got on my corner of it and hauled him back to the headquarters.
Did he make it, or do you know? Did he make it through the?
I have no idea.
Okay.
He was still breathing when I left.
When you left him?
Chances were not very good.
Right. So you kept. I mean, how far then did you end up going? I mean, did you end up marching, clear through the bulge, and did you end up going clear up through the Battle of the Bulge with this?
Oh yes, but there's a lot more to say before that. Unless you
I've got time.
Well, when finally we got, after about 6 weeks of fighting, we got the place breast liberated, undressed, shall we say. We were told that we captured 38,000 prisoners, and it was not done cheaply because there were a lot of more casualties, lots of them. There were 3 divisions at it, and I met the first of the French civilians I could talk to there, and one of them lived in Brest and moved out to be at a safer place with friends in the country. And she evidently had a little store of some kind, and she was very worried about her property. And as soon as the place was liberated, she went in to check it, and she came back in tears, just screaming, and did all night. And she said, "Rien, rien, rien." Nothing. But it either been blown up or stolen.
Yeah.
So she was out. And I used that. We studied the negative in the French sometimes. Most upper classes did. And I used that expression to kind of liven it up a little bit, told them about what happened to that woman.
Right.
And here's I believe of all the things I remember with satisfaction in the war is this I'm going to tell you now. I was put. They didn't want me to be idle, so I was put on the sergeants of the motor pool to check the batteries, radiators, the tires.
You want to get that?
I got it right here.
I'll just pause.
Is it yours?
I'll just pause it. Yeah, it's yours.
Is it your phone or mine?
No, it's yours.
It's true that in ordinary circumstances, people don't work themselves to death in the Army. Lots of hurry up and wait. And some work, but not very much. Anyway, I was wandering around there and heard a voice hissing. He's saying, de l'essence pour mettre le blé. Now that's de l'essence. L'essence is gasoline.
Okay.
Some gasoline to beat the wheat. In other words, to thresh.
Okay.
Well, you can well imagine that the Jerry's didn't let the French people have any gas. If they had any themselves, they surely wasn't going to hand it out to the French. And they have to have so much of that to get their wheat crop in, or they lose it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was his problem. And so I thought it over, and when the sergeant in charge there showed up, I told him, I wised him up. He turned it over in his mind for a few seconds and said, "Well, Frazier, I didn't see anything, but if anything comes of this, it's your ass." And I said, I accepted his permission on that basis.
Right.
And the Frenchie and I, the farmer and I, took turns lugging a jerry can. You know what jerry cans are?
Mm-hmm.
Full of gasoline, about a mile or a mile and a half over to across the fields to his house. And that was a real eye-opener. It's a nice looking house, relatively nice. And it had a barn and had a dozen or so dairy cattle. And the dairy, have you ever been to Maine?
No, sir.
Well, there's French people who've been in Maine because they have the same arrangements there as they had over here.
Okay.
Here's the house, And a shed right next to, on built onto the house is where they keep the cows.
Okay.
And you can walk right, open the door and walk right into the cows. They open the kitchen. And you would think, that's impossible. That'd be a hog pen for sure.
Right.
Wrong. The women were clean-minded and they worked hard and they kept the place nice. And they were very appreciative, of course, of the gasoline. And I was enough of a farmer to know what they were doing.
Right.
It just seemed like God's gift somehow. The one that I was the only French speaker around that they could have possibly found, and two, that I was somebody that was willing to help them out.
Right.
And I did, and I felt good about it ever since. And I watched what they did. They have a little motor there about the size of about that thing there, a little taller.
Mm-hmm.
And it had of course, a place to put a couple of gallons of gas in it on top, and a pulley, and they had an old fashion threshing machine on the other end of the belt. And are you enough of a farmer to know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And it was something like what we did at Nashport, only more primitive and slower.
Right.
And they couldn't put a whole sheaf in the thing at the same time. They had to cut the band, which was made of straw,
Mm-hmm.
and feed it in a little bit at a time. And they brought the grain in, the sheaves in on a two-wheeled cart, a huge long one, wheels 6 feet high, and pulled with shafts and one horse. And they could hold quite a lot on there, and they fed it in that way. And when it was threshed, the people with forks, and the forks were made of wood entirely, would shove that on back into the barn where they kept the straw dry, and the chaff and wheat fell down
Mm-hmm.
onto a badly used canvas underneath, not so big. And it was the women's job to pull it out of there when there's a recess and hold it up in the air. There's plenty of wind, breeze off the ocean, because we're pretty close to the ocean. And that breeze would blow the chaff away, and the wheat would drop down onto the canvas. And 3 or 4 of those siftings would get pretty clean grain. And that's the way they took care of it.
That was probably something for you to see, since you
since
you were used to farming.
It was. And by the way, 20 years later, I was back there on another reason to study more French. And by that time, the Marshall Plan was in effect, and they had self-propelled combines.
Was it the same fella? I mean, did you go to
Oh, no, I didn't. But the same idea.
Right.
And the carts that I remember seeing many of, I did see one stove back under a tree someplace, but an antique. Nobody ever paid attention to it.
Right.
Anyway, I didn't tell you this, but I was raised up to be a thrifty person, frugal,
Mm-hmm.
and worked hard, and I saw a chance to make some money. Nobody liked to do their own washing. They didn't have a laundry facility. So, for 50 cents, I would take their jeans and their shirt, and I didn't do underwear.
Okay.
Jeans and shirt, and soak them in cold water. And I had GI soap. I'd smear it on there, and a GI brush, and give it a good going over that way, and make 2 or 3 rinsings, and throw it over the nearest whatever to dry. And everybody had to pick up their own. But for about 50 cents, I did those, and I made over $700 on that altogether.
Wow.
That's between Texas and the Elm River, which is about 50 miles from Berlin. That's where we ended up.
Uh-huh.
So that means more than 1,400 pairs.
Wow. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a
Well,
lot.
there's nothing else to do much.
Right.
Might as well improve your time.
There you go.
And when I got home, my wife had stayed with her parents, and they used the allotment that I had for the wife and child, and the money I sent home out of my check. It was all spent, but the $700 would make just about what there was
Mm-hmm.
that we could start on. Anyway, the reason I mention that is because I was very interested in how the French women did theirs. Well, they used the same kind of water I did, cold,
Right.
and they didn't have any soap. And it's very rocky ground there. The soil is thin and on just solid rocks underneath it. And down over the hill from their home, there's a good size, I'd say a small brook, really small one, that ran over this solid rocks, and somebody had gouged holes in it so that the women could put their feet in those holes and kneel down over that water and do their work. And they did it about the same as they had what I would call a paddle. Did you ever see butter made?
Yes.
Ever see a butter paddle?
Yes.
That's about the nearest thing you could say. Just about like that. And they wet this thing, maybe a sheet or whatever, in the water, and hold it up just above the water, and it was wet, and they'd whack it and drive water through it. And I suppose they didn't let them get very dirty because they were amazingly clean. They just looked right decent.
Without having soap.
Well, they knew how, of
Right.
course. And the thing is that they didn't let them get filthy to start with. And they did the whole thing, and then they took them up and flung them over the top of a bush with plenty of bushes around. And that was their clothesline. And that's when they dried, they came and got them. And I don't know whether you want to hear what the house was like inside or not.
Sure.
Well, I was there quite a while and ate several meals there. By quite a while, I mean maybe a week, a little less. That's for me.
That's you.
And where were we?
You were telling me you were eating meals. You'd eaten meals there. That you were staying in the or you'd been in the home for about a week.
The most interesting thing to me was the way they cooked. They didn't have range the first. They had an open fireplace and andirons on it. That's a chain from above, and on the end of that there's 4 different spokes out and hooks on the end of the spokes. so that they could hook a sort of like a bucket on that and let it hold a skillet or a pot or whatever. And if the fire's burning fairly well, and you want to burn more, you put it over the fire and you move it back.
Right.
And you think, well, how could they do that? Well, they did it, and they came up with a pretty good meal too. And you think, guess what people can do when they have to?
Right.
Well, they didn't seem to bother them any. I thought the ground was very poor and their crops were not very good, but the people looked healthy, and considering the situation, I'd say they were pretty happy.
They were probably really happy to see you guys there.
Well, I suppose, but that wasn't really what I meant. I mean, they were not persecuted and miserable, and they were getting along halfway well. And they had a table about like our picnic tables, only bigger and thicker, and it was polished so it just gleamed, and that's where we ate. And the women, the adults, had kind of alcoves around the edge of the house where they could get in and pull the curtains, and that's where they slept. And the kids went by roof ladders up and slept above there. It's sort of a I never was up there, but that's where they slept. And the cattle out back, there were maybe a dozen of them. I didn't pay much attention really, but it's quite a matter of prestige. The amount of manure your farm produces in a year, the more you got, the better, bigger cheese you are. So they stack in front of the house on the cobblestones until the middle of summer, and then they get out and pile it in piles, and then they go out and later on with the second time out and scatter it. But it was still there full force when I was there.
Right.
And you'd think there'd be flies, but I didn't see a one. I don't understand it.
I don't either.
It's hard to believe.
So after you left there, you had to move in?
Well, just very shortly after that. In fact, that's what interrupted me. I got back here in time to get hooked on. We got the orders to pack up and head out. And the whole division moved as one body. And we traveled in an ambulance, and that's kind of unfortunate because you can't see much.
Right.
You can, all we could do is look through the windshield. Now the ambulance have seats on them with hinges on them that you can push them up like this to put in the wounded or whatever, or down, and you can sit on them, so the rows of people sit. And so we took off from that area, and fairly early in the morning, and went through Chartres, where there's a very famous cathedral, and we could see that through the windshield miles ahead before it ever got there. Most of the ground was planted to wheat. That area was still standing, only about so high and pretty skimpy on the ground, I thought. But and poppies in it.
Mm-hmm.
And went through Chartres and Paris and Verviers and Huy, H-U-Y, that's a city in Belgium.
Okay.
And Liège, another city, and finally over to a place called Maastricht, in the very edge of Holland, and that's about where the line was, and that's where we decamped in the area that our little outfit was entitled to. And we were met by a well-dressed looking Dutchman, and had a nice business suit on, and he was very glad to see us, and they were very hungry, and all I could see as they'd been eating was what they call chard, which grows in the garden. It's sort of like spinach.
Okay.
And we gave them some K rations. That's soybean crackers and some kind of spam, oftentimes, some kind of meat, and some kind of powder to make coffee or tea, and a little bar of fruit, prunes or something. And they were very glad, very glad to get that.
How bad?
I got to be kind of a sociable person, I guess, and I ended up staying at their place about that night.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And this is sort of between you and me.
Right.
When morning came, all of them pile out. Everybody's in bed, in separate beds, but all of them pile out there except a girl about my age, I suppose, and me. And nothing was said about it, but I think the idea was we were supposed to squeeze up.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen. She wasn't pretty enough to start with.
Okay.
But at any rate, we got organized there, and it takes a lot of organizing. It really does. And we joined the line and pushed forward to the part of Germany that's on the west side of the Rhine River. And our division took Mönchengladbach, which is the largest town in that area. And then it was time to cross the Rhine River, and for some reason, the Germans who had been blowing up all the bridges across the river missed one. And a large, it wasn't our outfit, but another one managed to rescue that bridge, and several divisions went across there, and we crossed over at the I can't think of the name of it right now. I used to be able to tell you. I can't think of it. But we crossed over on the pontoon bridges after we get pushed back to where they can build them. You know what they are?
Yes, sir.
Just little flat boats tied together.
Yeah.
And your tank or your truck or whatever, get on there and just zip across. And after we'd liberated, we called it, liberated that part of Germany. Why, this is interesting, I think. We had been, everybody we'd met had been very, very glad to see us. Smiles and throw flowers and offer whiskey, offer wine or whatever.
Right.
The first bunch we saw went, so you could tell we were in enemy territory.
Yeah. You knew where you were.
Oh, shoot. And let's see. When you went to got across, we had to reorganize, and the thing was that by that time there wasn't a real front, a solid one, and we were just sort of warehoused in the Ruhr River Valley, which is the biggest industrial part of Germany, and the city is side by side, just solid through there. We were in the city of Ham, H-A-M-M, and we got there, and we were each assigned several assigned a house, and they were nice big mansions, coastal mansions, very nice. But all the furniture had been, something happened. Either they took it away with them, or somebody put the finger on it or something. Except for a grand piano. This is too big to get rid of, I guess. Now, my mother, I think I told you, was a musical person. And she'd spent 3 years in Philadelphia perfecting her skills. And my sister and I took lessons from her. And we were not nearly as talented as she was. Dad couldn't carry a tune in a bushel basket. And I think I took after Dad. And
the last time I talked to you, you told me how sick your mother was, and you weren't allowed to have a boyfriend. And she said, "Well, yeah."
I got there's some music there in the bench. She raised it up and there it is. And I spent the next 2 or 3 weeks, quite a bit of time there, trying to bring myself up to date on some of the stuff Mother taught me. And I began to make some progress.
And that helped pass the time, probably.
Exactly. And I wasn't in the laundry business right then, so I was trying to become a musician instead.
Right.
So, well, about that time, they decided it's time for us to go, so we headed out of there, went east, and there was, well, I believe we're now at the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay.
Just about this time it lit. And we were in an area where there were 3 divisions, I believe, and a sort of another outfit. I don't know what they called them, but it was another force that was holding the line in case anything happened. Well, when the Battle of the Bulge took off, about 25 miles south of us, all the others except our division was pulled out to get down there to help fight. We weren't, but we were playing guard duty, and we could easily hear what was going on down there. But we played no part in the Bulge.
Now, did you have winter equipment with you? Because I know a lot of the guys didn't have overcoats, and they weren't real well prepared.
I'll come to that here.
Oh, okay.
This is about the time to talk about it too. We were in Germany in a place called a little village called Searsdorf, and all the hello, dearie.
You know you have to pick up a refrigerator at 3:30.
Oh.
Well,
And you got Cordell's coming to.
Well, go ahead with just what you were gonna finish up on the bulge. And what you were talking about, just finish up with that.
well, I've about finished that as far
Okay.
as I'm concerned.
All right.
Because
And then
everybody
when
knows
did?
what I read in the papers.
Okay.
After
Then
that.
when did you ship home?
October of the same year.
Okay.
Be October of 45.
Okay.
We went clear on over, just pretty much just by convoy. From there on over to the Elbe River, which is the demarcation, and that's where we met the Ruskies. And the Germans really wanted us to go to Berlin, so the Ruskies wouldn't,
Yeah.
but we didn't.
Yeah.
And we were under orders not to let any Germans across onto our side, but there weren't enough MPs to keep them out, and so a lot of them got over, and they offered watches and money and everything they could think of to bribe people into letting them across.
Right.
And we were not right on the front line. We were back about 2 or 3 miles. But some of them got there, and I talked to one. I didn't know any German to speak of when I went over there, but I'd had some practice in learning languages. So I got to the place where I was the interpreter for the company and drove a big ragtop Buick around, a command car, with a major sitting in the back. I drove and I talked, and he just lended gravitas to the situation. But what we were trying to do was discover the sources of infection, venereal disease, which there was plenty of around, and people come in to get treated. They said, "Where'd you get this?" And they told him what the address was, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we would go out and line up and find it, and nobody could talk to him but me. I learned enough to do it. And they'd say things like, ich weiß nicht, wo ist. Sie ist weg bis 3 Tagen. Don't know where she has been gone 3 days. Probably a big fat lie, but then, you know. But that's all. What you gonna do?
Right.
So it was just something to remember. A waste of time, what it was.
Yeah.
Now the other thing I did is, in regard to translating, I could go to the Kupfermann, which is the plumber, and tell him what was wrong with the water pump in the officers' quarters, and go back and sometimes fix it from his instructions. Not always, but sometimes.
Right.
So I did do some good.
Well, yeah. Well, that's good. And so when you came home, then when did you come to Licking County?
Well, I married a girl from Alexandria. You know where that is?
Yes,
Right?
sir.
And after I was drafted and I knew I had to go, there was a time. There was always slack time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up and helped her father on the farm, and that was in Alexandria.
Okay.
And so that's when I first came to Licking County. And later on I went back to Nashport after the war
Mm-hmm.
for a year or two, and then it's so much happened I can't really cover it all. But the thing is that my wife had 5 kids. My wife and I did, and she died shortly after that of what do you call it? Cancer of the blood.
Leukemia?
Exactly. and I had the kids to take care of. They were an age from 12 down to 6 when she passed. And I lived at Fraziersburg at that time. You know where it is, maybe?
Yep.
On a little farm. And I got to the place where I had to have some income to take care of it, put food in everybody's mouth. And finally decided to see about it. I had my degree from college, but it was not in education. But I knew there was a shortage of teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up to Newark, and partly because my parents had moved there ahead of time. They ended up here in the country, about 5 miles north of here.
Okay.
And so I came up here and talked to the assistant superintendent of schools on a Thursday. And on a Friday, I went over to Columbus to get some papers signed. And on Monday, I was in front of a class at Roosevelt.
That's pretty good.
Teaching English and taking the place of a woman who's dropped out to nurse her dying husband.
Oh.
Her name was Miriam Coella. I don't know if you ever heard that name or not. I expect not. It's probably too old for you.
I think I've heard the name because my mom went to Roosevelt.
Well, but yeah, Coella was there. She did Upper Hudson's where she lived.
Okay.
That's Coella. And she's gone too now,
Right.
long since. So I was there until the end of the semester. It'd be about 12 weeks, I suppose. And so then Coella's husband had died, and she fixed things in a place where she could go back and earn some money. She reclaimed her job, night out for a while. And a week later, I got another call, and there's a place down here. Damn, I hardly remember the names, but the building's still standing. You get down the new road to Heath from Newark.
Mm-hmm.
You look over to your right, there's a big brick building there.
Okay.
Oh, what the hell is that? Anyhow, that's where it was. And in the 6th grade, there was 40-some kids in it. And they were not really terribly vicious or bad kids mostly, but they were just noisy and not contained. And the woman that was there just threw up her hands and left in tears and moved to Florida. At the end of that. So they called in Frazier.
And the rest is history.
Yep.